Hi and welcome to the State of the Net podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Ewan Semple.
And this is episode number
11.
I mean, at this point, I think that everybody had seen that video of the voice control elevator.
We can only hope. If not, go to YouTube, do a search for Scottish voice controlled lift and 11.
Yeah. Or I think you could just search for 11 and you will find
Really?
it.
It's become that famous, has it?
Yep. Well, it has been a while since our last episode, and there have been a number of good and bad and terrible news recently. And
that's the world for you.
And a few of them were related to social media. And I think that maybe... I mean, the one thing that we were most recently discussing was the fact that in Sri Lanka, after the attacks on Easter, they turned off social media. And some say that lives were saved because of that, because, that kind of prevented this very quick distribution of unfounded gossip that in that kind of environment might have caused attacks on minorities or other type of reactions. On the other hand, as you were saying, it's a slippery slope.
Well, just even as I hear you describing that again, I mean, I haven't read into it enough, but even just that statement, turned off social media, you think, how did they do that? How did that work? Who did it for them? Blah, blah, blah. And then that thing about unfounded gossip, I mean, in a post-truth fake news world, best of luck with that one. And, you're in a very sticky wicket trying to argue against something that is claiming that it saved lives. But, I was saying to you, Paolo, that I remember when my father had a motorbike accident a number of years ago, and it was at the time when there were riots around the UK, some of which were happening in Bristol, which is where the hospital was that he was in. And I was sitting up on the downs above Bristol, being very grateful for being able to do a hashtag follow on Bristol and see what was happening in the city and where the risks were or weren't. And at the same time, David Cameron was muttering about turning off Twitter and social media for similar reasons to those given in Sri Lanka. And again, it's one of these areas that we're not, it's not clear what the right thing to do is. I mean, we sort of haven't had this kind of mass, instant making sense of things available to us before. And previously we've talked about the need or otherwise for regulation, and I've obviously taken the stance for less regulation rather than more. But I don't think that means that it's unregulated. I just think it's something that we all need to think about and care about rather than just expecting somebody else to sort out for us.
Well, I think that as usual, complexity here plays a key role, and probably comparing the situation of a country that last had a civil war in 1651, I think, to one that just finished killing each other, a relatively short time ago, it's not fair. I mean, shutting down social media in England is ridiculous because there is somebody protesting on the street. Shutting down social media in a place where lynching mobs might be a truly possible
Who knows what
situation.
the near future might hold, though, Paolo?
I know, and then we might, and then after the second British Civil War, we might have to turn back off social media here as well. But I mean, I guess that the point is it's very hard to say there is one common rule that applies to everything. And I know I'm stating the obvious, but every time I hear, oh, they shut down social media in Sri Lanka. Oh, that's terrible. Nobody should ever be doing that. I said, well, nobody's doing it here. They did it there for a day, and they had risk. According to some, that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. doesn't mean that we need to I mean, at the same time, there were all the protests in central London that were terrible because some people actually got late at work.
For work, yeah.
And other people found people glued to their door, apparently. But I mean, all that was coordinated with social media, and it makes total sense, and it's good that it happens. And I think that no one thought of turning off social media. So there are.
Oh, hang on, that's not, no,
maybe somebody did.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense that there are people who, we've got a very polarised politics at the moment, and I'm sure extremes on both sides would quite happily turn off the other side. And what might seem to us as a reasonable, balanced difference of opinion can feel intimidating and deeply challenging. I mean, I had this happen on my own Facebook threads where a degree of feeling that flummoxed me became apparent through relatively innocuous statements. And so I think especially in a time where that level of volatility or intensity is around, we just need to be very careful who has the hand on the switch and what they do with it, I think. And
well, I mean, to be honest, I don't think that there is that many chances of in the Western world. I mean, let's keep in mind that there are plenty of countries where social media are off because they're blocked. And some are big successful countries, and or at least to some measure. But I don't think that anybody is threatening to switch off social media here today. But at the same time, I'm thinking, if on your Facebook page, with your social network, remember how many times we said that we have the clever people in our social network because we're so cool and so good at maintaining it, and still you had these riots of people calling names and this is the smart people that we have on our social media. These are smart people we're talking about. Those are supposed to be better at communicating, and they're failing miserably, and we are failing. I mean, I'm not saying anything. I mean, I was following the discussion on your page yesterday, and I was feeling sad because I was thinking I would like to be able to be part of this conversation. I would like to be able to reach out on the other side, but I can't. I have no idea how to do that. I truly don't know how to approach it.
It's interesting because in microcosm, this apparently trivial example has elements of the bigger picture, in the sense that I let it run, partly because I'm thinking, well, these are grown-ups, they're people I know. Who am I to tell them how to behave? So I didn't intervene at the time that the cat fight was happening. And sometimes that's a valid response, is just to let things run their course and run out of steam, and people end up, and sometimes letting them resolve things themselves, I know from experience, is the best outcome, if you like. And if you intervene too early, then you prevent that from happening. But what I did do was write a post later in the day calling for
order.
As I said in the post, sounding like the Speaker of the House of Commons. But just, I do believe that we need to learn how to conduct ourselves in these spaces. Not everybody, even people who've been around for a long time, appear to know. And I'm not saying that I know, I'm not telling them how to do it. But I think we all need to work out the ups and the downs and the pros and the cons of behaviours that are productive or otherwise collectively online. And the only way we'll do that is by having meta conversations about that. What works, what doesn't, what hurts, what doesn't. And I feel a sense of urgency because, we need to do this more. And in fact, it was interesting listening to the podcast that Joe Rogan and Russell Brand did together, because they were talking about this, about the power of the sorts of conversation that they were having. So, I mean, these are two guys, both of whom I love their podcasts, they're arguably at not opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're coming from a very different background and different sort of perspective on life, but meeting in the middle and listening to them working out where that middle was, and having the luxury of a 3-hour podcast in which to do it, felt like a good thing to do, and was so far away from the normal ding-dong, equal sides, everybody has to have their fair share on a news broadcast nonsense that means that Farage keeps getting his face on the telly. So I think, again, that we've got the means at our disposal to work out better ways to work out how to rub shoulders on these types of issues.
So do you think that it would make sense to invite two of the characters of yesterday's conversation to our next podcast and have a go at it? Not about the actual discussion that they were having.
That's a good idea. Yes,
but a discussion about the meta level. It's about the conversation. Actually, we should. I mean, it's a podcast. I'm editing it. If anybody mentioned Brexit once, I will just beep it. I mean, it's.
Well, I was also going to say you'll be struggling to keep to your beloved half-hour-long podcast. I think in that case.
Well, I mean, I don't have to do half an hour, but I mean, or I can edit it down to half an hour. I can just remove all the vowel. I can just speed it up.
Oh, you sound like a proper broadcaster.
But it could be an interesting experiment.
Yes, let's explore that possibility.
I mean, okay, maybe we should start for somebody simpler from your two friends.
Are you feeling the sort of the fear in my voice? Are you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with some of them.
Let's try and keep this as hard to decipher as possible, Paolo.
Yes, but anyway, it would be triangulate.
That's right, exactly.
But if the meta conversations is what need to happen,
no, I agree.
How can we make
how do you instigate
that?
Them?
How we instigate them? Because and how do we try to get these conversations to percolate? To the rest of the of the internet.
Well, it's really interesting because there was somebody on Facebook having a kind of knee-jerk reaction to Joe Rogan and assuming that he was part of a kind of alt-right thing or whatever. And I kind of had to say, have you listened to any of his podcasts? And they had, but not very many, and they were only the ones that were contentious, if you like. And because this is what I believe he's doing, and in another direction, Russell Brand as well, is not excluding people that he disagrees with and finding out from them what they think. And again, that instinct to understand and that curiosity as to why people think the way they do, genuinely, not in a patronising way, I think is key. And it always worries me when people just make assumptions about and leap to extreme assumptions about people. But it's tough. I mean, and the internet's a scary place, and I occasionally decide to go and have a look. I don't know if we've talked about this in the last podcast, but I lifted the lid on QAnon the other day there on 4chan, and quickly put the lid back down again because it's just this incredible. It's like going back to the early days of alt-rec, misc binaries. It's just the internet at its worst sort of thing. And it's obviously still there, and that's not an easy place to go into or try and do anything about,
Well, I guess that what is interesting is that we have this phenomena that has been around for 30 years now, and they're layered. So there is thing that was around 30 years ago, things that was around 20 years ago. There was thing that wasn't around 10 years ago, and then there are things that are happening today.
Yeah.
And there are things that we don't even realize, or we're not completely. I mean, I was reading earlier today that the Snapchat is on reaching 90% of Americans in the 16 to 30 years bracket.
Gosh, I thought.
And I think
Instagram.
and I wasn't even aware Snapchat is a thing. Actually, Snapchat just announced their quarterly results, and they're doing pretty well. Their business is growing. They're doing things.
I thought once Instagram started having stories that the kids had drifted away from Snapchat.
I kind of had that feeling too. Yeah. Yet there is this huge thing that exists. So I think it's interesting. There are huge things from the past which are still there, and we're kind of aware of. And then there are huge things of the future that we're also not aware of.
Well, and even that, I mean, having the two young daughters, I mean, I mentioned TikTok to Hannah the other day there, and she I think she and her friends are sort of steering away from it as kind of like self-indulgent and self-promotion. And it's interesting how, again, contrary to what many people assume, the kids are very discriminating about which tools they use and what for and what they get from them, and that level of maturity, I think, is spreading. I think that how we deal with some of the problems that we've been touching on about trolling or extremes or just learning how to speak effectively and deferentially to each other is something that I think actually kids are learning maybe faster than the rest of us. Don't know.
Well, one would hope so. Even if, to be honest, at this point we already have generations of adults that have known the internet all their life, and
still don't get it right.
Not necessarily but maybe the first generation wasn't particularly good. I mean, I love seeing interaction with. I mean, I have a few. All my nephews and nieces are. We are connected on Instagram and a few other networks, and very regularly I post photos of booze, and they all like it and find it kind of embarrassing. But it's interesting to see how some interaction work, and it's different from our approach, where we see this as a publishing platform. We see this as a place where we create some for future generation to find and read, which of course not the case.
I don't.
To some degree, I still perceive to be honest, I'm not publishing anything anywhere anymore, but except for some photos on Instagram. But I still kind of see this as a publishing platform.
No, it's funny because I've always seen it as pretty ephemeral. In fact, I was thinking about this the other day, where I might, if I can face the effort, switch to back to WordPress rather than Squarespace, because some things about Squarespace are doing my head in at the moment. And I thought, well, what if I lose all my, that's now 17 years worth of blog posts? And part of me wouldn't be bothered, because all that's ever interested me really is the conversations I'm having at any particular time. I'm never that convinced any of them have got any retrospective merit. So I never really feel much like I'm publishing, more that I'm instigating a conversation of some sort that's quite ephemeral, really.
Okay, I mean, I guess that there are. We all come to this from different.
Which is what we were saying before we started, wasn't it? Yeah, that exactly. You have to remember that when you're talking to people, that their perspective of what's happening could be quite different from yours. In
any case, I think that the good takeaway from this episode is. It would be falling perfectly within the scope and the mission of State of the Net. Trying to trigger more meta conversations around and possibly trying to bridge between these different points of view
or at least finding a way for them to connect and talk. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not expecting anybody to leave and agree, but I would expect me to have a better understanding of different points of view.
So as a way of something else that happened in between this and the last podcast was Julian Assange. Mm-hmm. Good guy, bad guy, hero, villain. What do you reckon?
Well, it's a very complex situation. So it's hard to say. I mean, overall, I must say that I do not have a very positive opinion, in the sense that in a sense that releasing batch of stolen information in what is, and some might say unfiltered and uncontrolled, on the other one I say irresponsible way, is not the adult thing to do, because it's saying, okay, we don't like how information works today, fine, I agree, we don't think that, that we think that there is the need of a change, and fine and agree. You take stuff that you know is coming from Russian intelligence services and you publish it with the purpose of possibly annoying somebody who is after you. I mean, fun, but I'm not exactly sure that was a clever thing to do, and that I agree. Having said that, I don't think that he should be rotten in a cell, probably for this. I don't think that the way America is going after him, and let's remember it was mostly Obama's America, it's not even Trump's America. It's sick. I mean, I guess the only good news is that there is a free room at the Ecuadorian embassy, and apparently the Queen is trying to get there while Trump is in town.
That's right, claiming immunity. I mean, it's interesting because I think, you know, there is much not to like about the guy himself, and it gets muddied up with that to some extent. I think reading some thoughtful journalists about the risks of, and you know, we could argue again whether he's a journalist or not, but it has implications for investigative journalism. If you're digging into a truth that makes states uncomfortable, in fact, it sort of goes back to the Sri Lankan thing that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. There are consequences of not being concerned about that, and I think the nature of the diplomatic relationships between different countries, between Sweden, between Britain and America, are complicated and interesting in this case as well. And also, you know, I can't remember the details, but if I remember correctly, it wasn't WikiLeaks that actually sent out the unredacted content; it was a third party. But so I think, yes, I think it would seem disproportionate to completely, you know, I think the response will be disproportionate against Assange, and that seems wrong.
Look, I also think that there are different moments in time, and there are different actions that have been taken, and they should be judged on their own. So when there was the Chelsea Manning leaks, okay, probably, of course, the American government would have never allowed that. It was good that some of those things came out. Probably if it would have been done in a way more similar to, you know, what the leaks a few years later. Look at the Snowden files. Yeah. Okay, the way Snowden, I think that the way Snowden leaks were managed was better than the way Chelsea Manning leaks were managed. Mm-hmm. But in any case, I'm not too concerned about that. Even recently, I read of a huge conspiracy theory where I think in India, which is where these things are quite popular, which is based on one of the cables that were leaked. Right. And it's completely based on nothing, but it's based on the misreading of a private conversation.
Yeah.
You know, from some point of view, I think that they were very interesting. Hearing how people really talk about each other in their backs is interesting. And it's, you know, honestly, was I expecting it any different? Of course not. I mean, of course these people have a meeting. I mean, how many times you had a meeting and then you report to your colleagues, and what you say in a meeting, in the report, is not what you would want the people you just met to hear. It's natural. So being scandalized about that is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the leak of the Democratic Party emails were clearly there with a very specific purpose of favoring one party during the elections. Now, that was also going through WikiLeaks, and that bit, I mean, did we really need to know that? Was that part of transparency? Was it? I mean, you release that data in that specific moment in time, and you don't realize that that is going to have consequences.
So
I'm a little bit. I mean, yes, of course, we need more transparency. There is, but there is such thing as context. As we were saying earlier, there is not one rule that fits everything.
Nor is there one sense of right that fits everything.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think we're kind of struggling with. You know, it's almost like that person who once said to me, it was better in the old days when you just knew that the news told you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the BBC told you the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's be specific.
That's right. Well, that was never true. Did their best, and there was a rigour around it that you could have some confidence, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying it was rubbish, but I sort of am as well, in the sense that simpler world never really existed. It just looked simpler because you didn't get faced with the types of choices that we're now being faced with. And it is this thing of minefield of motivation, ideology, a technology that goes too fast for us to work out what the hell we're doing with it before the consequences become apparent. That is both terrifying and exciting at the same time, you know?
The challenge is that as a society, we need to be able to reach a consensus on something because, I mean, we need to have laws and we need to have rules. The problem is that simplifying the decision process in order to get to these laws and rules doesn't work, and this is
yes.
what most populists are doing. I mean,
yes.
Populism is applying simple solution to very complex problems that are not actually solution, but
exactly.
people tend to resonate.
And you know, as we both know, the institutions that we would normally expect to deal with these things aren't keeping up either, and you know, that's been the part of what my work has been about, is trying to get into these places and help, but it's not been easy, you know, because they don't want help. They don't see the problem yet, half of them.
No, but that is the same reason why when I saw the TED talk of the Guardian journalist who presented a couple of weeks ago, and in a very provocative way at the end, she showed this picture of a group of presumably politicians sitting around the table with an empty seat and the sign reading Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg didn't show up, and I was thinking, well, she has a point on a number of arguments, but we have seen Mark Zuckerberg interacting with a bunch of politicians. I don't trust the politicians either. I mean, I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg, but I don't trust the politicians either because they have no clue about what he's talking about.
No.
So, yes, we all need to raise to a higher level, and this is proving to be more difficult. I think that there is probably also an aspect of how comfortable we are with uncomfortable situations.
Yes.
I think that maybe today, and I don't know how much this is related to how the internet has changed society or how society has been evolving by itself, but we have an expectation of everything going fine that is somehow not the because things have never been that
exactly.
fine.
It was a myth.
The poor journalist who was killed in Ireland,
yes.
And from the report you have a terrorist group, which is a tiny group of people that, for whatever reason, they are motivated and they want to create a problem. There's no way to stop that. I mean, there's no way you can stop a small group of very motivated people. It will keep happening. And the truth is, it has been happening all along. Actually, it has been happening much less recently, but every time it happens now, it feels like... I was looking at a documentary the other day about how frequently airplanes were hijacked in the 70s.
Yes.
And it was like multiple times per day.
Yeah, I mean,
American. It was happening all the time.
Yeah.
And people were just living with it to say, oh, that's bad, but it's just something that happens.
Yeah.
But everything that happened in the post, I think that there is probably the big moments are the post 24 hours a day news channels, and then the post social media, where everything that happened can be hugely amplified, and because it is an attention getter, you can just pump it and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. We find ourselves in a situation where, by all means, I mean, every single person who died is an immensely sad thing, but we can't prevent that from happening. I mean, it will keep happening.
Yep.
We just need to learn to be a bit more comfortable with that. We need to keep improving things, but when something goes wrong, it's going to be fine. Unless you're the one who dies, then in that case, it's going to be fine too.
Well, and this is going to sound like a ridiculously extreme view, but even the stuff about the global warming and its effects, and when people say they're concerned about the planet, and I always think, well, the planet's fine. It'll survive. We'll have gone, and we're a very, very short blip in the history of this planet anyway, and that understandable desire for longevity. And people say it always sounds a bit heartless. What about my kids? Well, but we are. It's going to sound so trite, but we are all going to die someday. I mean, the thing that worries me more is the amount of attrition and fighting and unpleasantness that will happen before the planet finally shrugs us off. And that's sort of lurking in the background of a lot of the tensions at the moment as well, I think. And again, I feel so strongly that we have this tool, we have this ability to get our heads around issues. We can understand what's happening in terms of the planet. We have increasingly the means to do something about it at a time when we really, really need to do that. And we're still not learning how to do it fast enough.
I don't know. I mean, I must admit that listening to an interview to the Swedish Greta, the Swedish student who's launching all the recent protests, I was feeling a bit uncomfortable. I mean, I was saying, well, probably she's right and I'm wrong. I mean, it's time, and I'm using this and I'm quoting and I'm doing big, air quotes around panic, but maybe it's time to panic a little bit more. It's like because I mean I was thinking about myself and saying, oh, I'm here, I'm all conscious, I'm all ready. I believe in global. I'm totally think that global warming is a true thing. I understand that it's going to be a serious situation, but what am I actually do? I mean, as we were saying before, I go shopping with my own plastic bag. That's pretty much all I'm doing for global warming. I mean, and recycle a little bit. I mean, it's maybe I should do something more. I'm not saying that protesting is a solution, but I'm not even doing that.
But so being the scale of the problems can make people give up. They kind of go numb in the face of the challenge, and yet, actually, we have the solution more readily at hand than we think. And this is, I'm not an activist, I'm not saving the planet, I'm blah, 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 but I am, in my little way, trying to help people have better, more productive and more useful conversations online, because I think that, and also I think in terms of how people perceive themselves and others and relate to each other, these are the kind of things I think about and write about, because frankly, from my perspective, that's how we will solve the problem. We get into these problems because we externalise things. We think the outside world is going to make us happy. We see ourselves in competition and separate from other people. And until we sort that, we're not going to sort the big problems that are causing the planet to fall apart. So it's not that we can't do anything,
I agree. I mean, in the same way I could say, I help people creating new companies, and these companies all have a positive impact on society. This is one of the reasons why we pick them. Still, I'm not sure that there should be something more. I mean, maybe there should be something more that I could focus on that I'm not. Maybe there isn't. Maybe just too complicated, and just try to be good people and help others is good enough.
And I think in the long run, it's all it takes. It's just that we've not been doing that for so long. And actually, going back to your thing about happiness and about expecting things to work out and expecting things to be right and okay, that's a mindset. That's a projected, idealised future that didn't used to be the case. I mean, in the Middle Ages, you expected to have a short, brutish life, and maybe you acted better towards people because of that. I don't, who knows? But I do think it's at a personal and interpersonal level that the world's problems will only be sorted. Now, the fact that Greta manages to get into places where she's accessing people who arguably have influence increases her leverage, but it's still genuinely, it's one conversation at a time. And all you can do is try to have the best conversations with the best people for the best reasons.
I think that we found a pretty good thing to do for our homework. How long are you going to be in Australia?
Until the 21st of May.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty long trip.
I'm doing lots of workshops with frankly, again, with some senior people, trying to encourage them to take more active measures to make this all turn out well. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
All right. So for all our listeners from Down Unders, I think they can find the dates of your workshops on your website.
Not on my website, but the main workshops I'm doing are for Jobs Australia, and I think all the details are on their website.
All right. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and tune sometime next month for the next episode of the State of the Net podcast.
See you next time.
Bye.